Hey everybody, Antoni here, and what a great evening of opera it was at the Deutsche Oper Berlin, where I saw Janacek's Jenufa, or Její Pastorkyně, her stepdaughter. Now, this is actually the second opera that I've seen from the great Czech composer Leos Janacek, and boy, was it amazing. Heck, I even have the entire opera on DVD starring Amanda Rucroft in the title role, and alongside her is Deborah Pulaski, who I saw a couple of days ago as the Kabanica, here in this DVD as the role of Kostelniczka, though it's all the way back in Cebu. But going to the review proper, as always, I have my little program here with me so that just in case I forget any names or screw up with pronunciation, I have this as my guide. The conductor was Donald Runnicles, who I heard him conducting Verdi's Otello and Don Carlo about 3 months ago, also at the same opera house. The production was by Christoph Loy, who is very particular about the psychoanalysis of the opera, not just staging the opera in general, but also getting into the character analysis of each character, especially the ones that are very complex. In this case, it's the Kostelniczkas, which is very complex. More on that later. The set design was by Dirk Becker. The costumes were by Judith Weihrauch. The lights were handled by Bernd Polkrabeck. The choreographer was Thomas Wilhelm. The dramaturgy was handled by Christian Arseny, and the chorus master was William Spalding. Now, the thing about Jenufa is that it's a very challenging opera for a lot of singers, especially when any soprano or mezzo-soprano sings the Kostelniczka. Now, this is a very challenging role for any dramatic soprano or any dramatic mezzo-soprano that dares sing this tough character. Psychologically, she goes through a lot. She has all of this guilt when she is raising Jenufa, and she kind of brings all of this guilt to her. But at the same time, she knows that in her heart that she loves her and cares for her. That's why she did this really crazy deed, more than crazy, but heinous deed by murdering her own baby or her own grandson. By how, you ask? By throwing him in an icy cold river. Now that is just chilling, really bone chilling, especially for someone like the Kostelniczka. Her real name is Petrona Buryovka, to do that. But basically, she tries to do it for Jenufa's own good so that Jenufa won't go down the same route as her. But even then, that's really quite shocking. But this is actually a welcome role for any aspiring dramatic soprano, or not really aspiring, but any dramatic soprano who have been past their prime, or any dramatic mezzo who still have enough meat in their voice, or have a lot of meat in their voice. And it's attracted a lot of singers like Leonie Rizanek, Astrid Varnay, Eva Randova, Amy Schuard, a lot of great dramatic sopranos and dramatic mezzo-sopranos flock to sing this very complex yet somewhat sympathetic character. And Jenufa is also a challenging role as well. So ultimately, you really need two great female singers to really pull off the psychological and vocal challenges of both the stepmother, Petrona, and the stepdaughter, Jenufa. So it's a really great opportunity to show the sopranos acting skills, and not just really the singing skills, but also the acting skills as well. That's what really makes Jenufa such a great opera, and to me, it's a lot more complex than Katya Kabanova because, yes, it's not just Katya suffering, excuse me, it's not just Jenufa suffering, but it's also the Kostelnichka that's suffering as well. And frankly, Jenufa does learn something from this. Even though she's suffered a lot, she remains a strong woman, and that's what really makes, like I said, Jenufa such an amazing opera to really watch. More than just listen, but really watch live. I mean, seriously, you can never go wrong watching Jenufa live. It is that great, and it will make you teary-eyed. It will make your heart swell with such great emotion. There's almost no other opera that can do that for me. Now that's out of the way, let's move on to the production. Since this is a Christoph Loy production, the sets are really quite minimal, but it's actually the characters that really make the meat of the story. It's actually the character analysis that we really have to put in our brains so that we could realize what these characters are going through as people, so that we could relate to them. So yeah, it really shows that what Loy puts into this production is a lot of character development, a lot of character analysis. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What ticks them? Or what annoys them? What hurts them, even? Yes, I know, the scenery could be a lot more expanded or even bigger, since this is originally set in a Moravian village. But even then, that's all forgivable because this actually shows that this is somewhat like Kostelnichka's world. It's quite bleak. It's not all that happy. She's lived her life full of misery because, well, let's face it, her first husband and even that of her second husband lost both of their lives through alcoholism. And here she is having this very important role in the church as a sexton. So we really do follow Kostelnichka in her troubles. Heck, we even see her in the beginning of the opera. That's why I really feel that Mr. Loy really did place a lot of emphasis on the Yei Pastorkinia section, because this is not just Jenufa's opera, but this is also Kostelnichka's opera as well. We not only relate with Jenufa, what she goes through, but also the Kostelnichka, real name Petrona. So this really is something very interesting and something that's very eye-opening, especially for someone who hasn't really heard of Jenufa before, or I'd rather call it Yei Pastorkinia before, and it really shows them the world of the Kostelnichka, of how bleak, how dreary, and how everything's not always that happy. And it kind of makes me think that, with this type of production, maybe there's almost no need for grand sceneries or big budget architecture here and there. I think it's really fitting to have this type of minimalist yet character-driven production, which I really like in the end. Sure, it may seem kind of off-putting for purists, but I'm actually open to any type of production. And as for me, it really sold it in terms of character analysis, in terms of how Kostelnichka sees her world, and it's a very interesting psychological study in terms of this production. And now let's move on to the singers, in which I'll have to say everyone was amazing, but I'll go through them one by one. And seriously, there's a lot of great singing that I've heard in this opera. And starting with the title role of Jenufa, we have Michaela Kaune, a German soprano who is very well known for her works in Wagner and Strauss. Just gorgeous. Her voice soars over the orchestra with such grace and finesse. Her high notes and low notes were all homogeneous. Vocally, she was so in shape. She has a lot of strength in her voice that she uses it to great advantage. She uses her instrument very well, and she's very careful with it even. And what we have is a very sensitive performance of Jenufa. And her acting was also really great. And she also looked really good on stage too. In the first act, we see her in a little red dress and red shoes, presumably to be well dolled up for the coming of Steva. And I really have to say, she looked absolutely gorgeous. No matter what costume she was wearing, she was really, really beautiful. And her voice and her acting abilities were equally as gorgeous. And then we have the second protagonist of the opera. Anyway, you slice it, both of these women are protagonists. We have the Kostelnichka, Petrona Buria, sung by Jennifer Larmore, who back then in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s was very well known for her works, for singing in operas from Rossini, Donizetti, Bellini, and some of the few French composers. And nowadays she sings a lot of the dramatic mezzo and soprano roles. Here, I thought she was really good. For someone who used to specialize in Rossini, Donizetti, and all of those bel canto operas, she really did make a good transition to the dramatic mezzo repertory. I have to say that I've also heard her Lady Macbeth, her three arias online on YouTube, and she really did pretty good. She was really good. And here as Petrona Buria, she was great. Vocally, there are times that she thins out, but let's face it, the role of the Kostelnichka is very challenging for both a dramatic soprano and a dramatic mezzo. She has all of those high notes, and she has all of those middle notes, but it's the high notes that really, really sell it for her. Then again, yeah, there are times that Mrs. Larmore was thinning out, but she got a lot better in the later acts. But overall, she was a very convincing actress. Sure, there are times that her voice wasn't always great, but that's all forgiven because this is a very, very tough role, both vocally and dramatically. Dramatically, she was very convincing. She basically started the evening with quite a little bit of an unsettling silent moment, and we kind of see how Petrona Buria thinks as a person, and we do see that through those eyes we see her suffering, her fears, her sorrows, and the tragedy that she went through when she was a lot younger. And when she sang her solo, Sochvilla, she started off with this hushed pianissimo tone, and later on she moved on to those really strong notes. And I'm actually pretty glad that Mr. Runnicles was able to allow Miss Larmore to sing all of those notes. So, yeah, that was a really great performance of the Kostanichka. Sure, there were times that Mrs. Larmore ended up going over the top in some of her movements, but even then, despite that, she was very convincing both vocally and dramatically. So a great kudos to her for making such a successful transition to the dramatic mezzo repertory and a memorable performance of the Kostelnička. In the role of Grandmother Buria, known in Czech as Starenka Buria and known in German as Alte Buria, we have veteran contralto Hanna Schwarz, another well-known interpreter of Wagner and Strauss. Just magnificent. After like 40 plus years of singing, she still has it. Her voice is still intact. Even when the curtain call came, the audience went wild over her. It really shows that even after 40 plus years of singing, Miss Schwarz still has that burnished contralto tone, and it was just lovely the way she handled her instrument and the way she continues to handle her instrument with such grace, finesse, and power. And she was able to play Grandmother Buria really convincingly as a very caring grandmother to Jenufa, Latza, and Steva, but mostly towards Jenufa because she does see how much she's suffering. And she's also a caring mother to Patrona, and she also does show concern for her. So Madame Schwarz really did an amazing job conveying the concern and the loving nature of Grandmother Buria, and vocally she still has it. She still has her burnished contralto tone, and there are almost no signs of her retiring. So overall, what a great performance as as the grandmother. I really applaud Madame Schwarz for such a memorable portrayal of this character role. I mean, let's face it, she's only there in the opera for two acts, one in Act 1 and the other in Act 3. But still, she was absolutely amazing. Then we have Will Hartmann as Latza Clemen. Now, this isn't really the first time I've heard Mr. Hartmann sing. Heck, I even have the Magic Flute DVD where he sang the role of Tamino, and I thought he was absolutely great. Sure, there are times that in my tastes his voice is quite heavy for Tamino, but even then, it kind of shows that he made the transition from baritone to lyric tenor to nowadays Heldentenor, or a dramatic tenor. And I have to say, the transition from baritone and to lyric to dramatic tenor actually really helped his voice. It really helped him find out that this is the Fach that he should be singing. And here, I thought he was magnificent vocally. He was able to sing over the orchestra. It was a huge and powerful instrument that really kept me on the edge of my seat. And he uses it to such great advantage. And his characterization of Latsa was quite convincing as well. Okay, there were times that his expressions were only one note, but there were other times that he was able to show a lot more emotion. But even then, that can all be forgiven because of his stentorian, leonine tenor voice. It is such a powerful instrument. It is such an instrument that is able to keep me hooked. And it actually seduces me quite a bit, even. And it really shows that Mr. Hartmann definitely has an amazing instrument as a tenor. Sure, his acting could be a lot better, though there are some moments where he does show improvement in his acting. But if I could forgive all of that, I would really, really root for his powerful, um, ringing tenor voice. It was just that exciting to hear him live. I mean, seriously. In the role of his younger brother, Steva, we have Ladislav Elgr. I haven't really heard that much of him, but I've only heard him in passing. But seeing and hearing him in the role of the roguish and childish Steva was just thrilling. Vocally, he was on the same level as Mr. Hartmann. He also had such a big, powerful tenor voice that he uses to great advantage. And acting wise, he was able to portray Steva's cockiness and roguishness and somewhat of childishness as well. Because let's face it, Steva isn't really that ready for marriage or fatherhood. I mean, he's still quite young, hence, he's a lot younger than Latsa, but not really by a long shot. Still, vocally and characteristically, Mr. Elgar was strong and powerful in his portrayal of the roguishly childish Steva. It was just a pleasure hearing this gentleman's voice live. And then we have Karolka, who is the daughter of the mayor and the mayor's wife, sung by Martina Welschenbach. She didn't really have a lot to sing, but she still has her beautiful, silvery, light lyric soprano voice, which I also had the pleasure of hearing her in Magic Flute and in Don Carlo. And I have to say, she was able to make Karolka very girlish and quite cute as well. And she still has it. She still has that beautiful, luscious instrument that really was a great treat to my ears. In the role of her parents, the mayor and the mayor's wife, we have Stefan Bronk, who I've heard basically in passing, but hearing him in the role of the mayor was great. He didn't really have a lot to sing, but his stage presence was commanding. His voice was equally commanding as well. It is a powerful, lusciously rich and round basso voice that really is quite addicting to listen to. And like I said, his stage presence was commanding. And when he saw Kostelnichka Petrona leaving the house to face the judge herself, he's quite befuddled of where's she going. So he follows her in a rush as well. And I thought it was quite funny, even though that scene was supposed to be taken a bit seriously, or a lot seriously. But even then, Mr. Bronk gave such a memorable presentation in the role of the mayor, and with his commanding basso voice, made it really, really great. In the role of his wife, we have veteran dramatic soprano Nadine Secunde, who specialized in a lot of works by Wagner, Strauss, and a lot of the roles for a dramatic soprano. And nowadays she does character roles, whether it's in the mezzo repertoire. Here, I thought she was really, really good. And she still has that powerful voice. Granted, she no longer sings a lot of those big dramatic soprano roles. She mostly sings a lot of those character roles. I mean, I don't really know if she's still singing those big dramatic soprano roles, but hearing her as the mayor's wife was a real treat. And her stage presence was also a real treat as well. Sure, she didn't really have a lot to sing, but she was actually really great in this role. It really shows that she's really loving towards her own daughter and her own husband as well. And plus, there's this little like mother like daughter moment in which both the mayor's wife and Karolka are blonde and they wear really chic clothing. And that's what I thought was really entertaining. And the chemistry between Madame Secunde and Miss Welschenbach was really great. It was really believable that they were both mother and daughter. And then we have The Old Miller, sung by Simon Pauly. Even though he didn't really have a lot to sing, he basically had such a commanding presence. He was able to make the small role of the miller such a roguish yet somewhat wise character, and his voice was a round, rich baritone voice that was absolutely luscious to listen to. And then we have the smaller roles of Barena, Yano, and the shepherdess slash maid, sung by Yana Kurutsova, Alexandra Hutton, and Finwala McCarthy. All of these women did magnificent, both vocally and dramatically. Even though they didn't really have a lot to sing or act, they were all very convincing. Their voices were in tip-top shape, and they were really pleasant to listen to. So overall, the singers did an amazing, like more than amazing, but an outstanding job portraying both their characters and singing their characters really well. And another thing I like to mention is, even like I said, even though there was a little bit of that Moravian um, farm feeling that was kind of lacking, there were some areas where it was kind of there through the dances, and mostly just that. Basically, through the dances, I still feel like I'm in a Moravian village, since a lot of the costumes were also like not really from the early 1800s, but they seem to look like they're from the 1900s, basically 20th century costumes. And I thought they were really good. I thought this really accentuated with how Mr. Loy saw this production. And another thing I like to mention is Mr. Runnicles was still great as ever in terms of conducting. He really helped the singers when it came to singing those really challenging notes. He helped them to such great extent, and a huge kudos for him, a huge kudos to the orchestra, and a huge kudos to the chorus. So it's no wonder why I really, really felt that this was a great evening of opera. It had great singing, a great and very interesting and thought provoking production, and most of all, great conducting by Mr. Donald Runnicles. So overall, it was absolutely outstanding. Special kudos goes to Madame Hanna Schwarz, Jennifer Larmore, Michaela Kaune, Will Hartmann, Ladislav Elgr, Nadine Secunde, Stephen Bronk, and Martina Welschenbach. Actually, a huge kudos to all of the singers because they were all, like I said, very outstanding. And it's all thanks to the great conducting of Sir Donald Runnicles. Well, that's all I have for this review. Be sure to tune in to my next upload or the next review. I don't really know what other plans I have for the upcoming month of February, but March is really looking promising. Oh, that reminds me, this coming February there's also the premiere of La Damnation de Faust by Hector Berlioz, so I'm very excited to see that. But March is a very promising month for opera, specifically with Berlioz, Le Troyan, Mascagni's Cavalleria Rusticana, and Leo Cavallo's I Pagliacci, and Mozart's Marriage of Figaro. So I'm very excited to see those operas. And not to mention, within this month, I might also plan to see Marriage of Figaro at the Staatsoper and Theater. Well, like I said, that's all for this review, and be sure to tune into the next upload. And until then, this is Antoni signing off and saying good night, and have a nice day wherever you're at.